So you believe that, you know, Adam and Eve and Noah's Ark, you believe, to just take something, Genesis 19:5, two angels came to Lot's house in Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, he was the only righteous man in the village, and the locals wanted to know the angels. They wanted to homosexually rape the angels. So Lot offered his virgin daughters instead as an appeasement. Sodom and Gomorrah was demolished after that, and his wife turned into a block of salt when she looked back. You believe that happened?
I take my cues from Jesus, who we've already agreed
So,
is historically
did that
accurate.
happen?
I believe that Jesus believed the Old Testament to be historically accurate.
Do you believe that that happened?
I believe it happened because Jesus did.
40%, 45% of the American people believe literally in Adam and Eve, believe literally that the world is only 6,000 years old. I mean, that's a shocking figure, and you can't duck out of it by saying, oh, sophisticated theologians don't believe it. Unfortunately, what sophisticated theologians believe isn't really relevant to what the majority of Christians do believe.
Gentleman there in the blue jumper. We're going to have to make this the last question.
Professor Dawkins, as an atheist, is it not the case that you either believe in the universe just popping into existence without a cause, which is worse than hocus pocus, or in this thing called the multiverse, which has as much independent empirical evidence as Hades controlling the underworld?
Right. The phraseology you use is somewhat biased, somewhat slanted. The universe popping into existence out of nothing, the multiverse theory is used in this context to explain the fact that some physicists believe that the physical constants are too finely adjusted. It's as though it's a put-up job. It looks as though the physical constants are so finely adjusted that if you change any one of them, then the universe would collapse. And I started to say that. Yes. Now, the multiverse hypothesis is a kind of Darwinian way of solving that problem. It says there are billions and billions of universes, all of which have different settings of their fundamental constants. A tiny minority of those billions and billions of universes have their constants set in such a way as to give rise to a universe which lasts long enough to give rise to galaxies, stars, planets, chemistry, and hence the process of evolution.
But do you understand, it does make me chuckle that you mock me for believing in a prophet that flies into a heaven, but you believe in lots and lots of universes that you can't show me, prove to me, test to me in a lab, as a basis of getting out of believing in a God and a prophet.
I'm astonished that you should compare the two.
I'm comparing the lack of evidence for the two.
Well, you cannot use your own intuitive common sense in order to diss physics. I mean, if you could do that, we wouldn't need physicists. I mean, they are very sophisticated people. They do mathematics.
But there are physicists like Paul Davies who have dissed the multiverse theory as being nonsense.
Well, Paul Davies would rather take the view that there's something mysterious in the origin of the universe, and that's another perfectly respectable physicist's view. Steven Weinberg, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist.
It's respectable if a physicist holds a view about mystery in the universe, but not if anyone else holds it.
If we're talking about the origin of the universe, that is a problem in physics, yes.
I come from a family where there are 2 skeptics and 3 religious fruitcakes. You can guess which side I'm on. Anyhow, I was just wondering, with your experience, if you've ever found a good way to hit the fruitcakes upside the head with some rational thinking and actually get them to pay attention.
It would be nice to say that all we need to do is to expose them to scientific evidence. And that's certainly a very important part of it, is what Neil and I are both trying to do. Unfortunately, there's a certain amount of evidence that there's a certain kind of mind which is so dyed-in-the-wool wedded to a scriptural version of the world that they more or less admit in advance that no matter what evidence comes, they will refuse to budge. I mean, a good example, my favourite example of this is the geologist Kurt Wise, who is a young Earth creationist, but who knows very well all the evidence for an old Earth from geology. And he has actually said in these very words, I think I quote him approximately right, if all the evidence in the universe pointed to an old Earth, I would be the first to recognize the evidence,
but I would still be a young earth creationist because that is what Holy Scripture tells me. Somebody who's actually prepared to come out and say that, and at least he's honest, somebody who actually comes out and says that, is pretty much advertising himself as beyond reason. He's absented himself from the rational discussion which the rest of us are having by announcing in advance that Scripture is going to take precedence over evidence. And here's a man who knows the evidence. He has a PhD from Harvard in geology. He knows the evidence, and yet he's announced in advance. So there are certain people who are unreachable, but my hope is that the vast majority of people are eminently reachable and just simply haven't been exposed to the evidence which is plentiful and wonderful.
It seems to me that you make science a religion in itself.
In what way?
Well, it seems like there's kind of a Richard Dawkins cult, Richard Dawkinism, like science really, nothing is certain in science. It works in statistics, you can't prove anything to 100%. So how can you say that science is better than religion, then what you're trying to do is still harm people that bring order to the world?
You can't prove anything to 100%, but 100% is a hell of a lot better than 0%, which is what you can prove by religious reasoning.
When John Lennon or Richard Dawkins asks us to imagine a world without religion, you find your mind wandering, and you're wondering what a world would look like without King's College Chapel, without the Taj Mahal, without Hagia Sophia, the Blue Mosque, the Parthenon, the Pantheon, the Sistine Chapel.
He also said, if we had no religion, how would we do without King's College Chapel, the Sistine Chapel, etc.? Well, you know, artists have to make a living, and in the time when the Sistine Chapel was built and its ceiling was painted, you know who had the money. Artists such as Michelangelo had to go where the patronage was. We shall never know the ceiling that Michelangelo might have painted if he had been commissioned to paint the Museum of Science, for example. We shall never know what Haydn's Evolution Oratorio might have sounded like, or Beethoven's Mesozoic Symphony.
For the next hour or so, can I tell you this? In a sense, we are wasting our time debating that we'd be better off without religion. It's not an option. Religion is part of our human makeup, and it's going to be a very interesting time that we spend, but essentially it's not a topic for debate. It's the way that we are.
He says we're fighting a losing battle because religion is a part of our human nature. Well, speak for yourself. It's not a part of mine, and it's not a part of the great majority of my friends in universities in England and the United States and elsewhere.